So guys, XML, as it stands for extensible markup language. Okay, and this is the language which is used as a media when services communicate with each other. So we use message is the media whenever services require to communicate with each other, and those messages are in which format? Those messages are in XML format, and that's why it becomes important for us to understand what exactly is XML, how is it written, and what are the different extensions of it. So when we say extensible markup language, what do you understand by markup? Markup is something nothing but tag based. Okay, this is a tag based language. Other tag based language which we encounter in our day-to-day life is HTML. Okay, HTML is another tag based language. So tag means something like we will have some elements, like say name, Sumit, name. So here whatever you see within the angular brackets, that is called tag. So here name is a tag with that is called as a starting tag, and correspondingly we have a closing tag. So that's why we call it as a tag based language. And basically when we move forward in the XML, we do not use the terminology tag, rather we use the terminology elements. So XML stands for extensible markup language. Okay, so XML doc will always have all XML doc will be always composed of elements. Okay, we will have different types of elements within the XML document, will be always composed of elements. That XML is software software, hardware, and platform neutral, which makes this as a most important language whenever we have to do inter-platform communication, inter-technology communication. So since XML is software, hardware, and platform neutral, that's why it is considered to be a language which can work among the different platforms. Okay, which can come work among the different technologies. So XML file is more or less like a text file, like how we have a notepad or a text file. Okay, so it is more or less like this. That's why it works among the different platforms. Now most of the times people get confused between XML and HTML, and they don't understand what is the difference between the two. So XML is actually a tag based language, and even HTML is a tag based language. It is a tag based language, that's true, but its elements are user defined. User has the privilege to decide the name of the tag or name of the element which is defined, but that's not the case with the HTML. In the HTML, all the elements are predefined, or all the tags are predefined. So let's say in the HTML, when you have to design a web page which should have a table, so you have to definitely use a table element itself. You cannot afford to use any other element, because those are predefined, those are standard elements. But that's not the case with the XML. In the XML, you can start with your own elements. You can decide the name as per the use case. So that's one thing which is different between the XML and the HTML. Next thing is HTML is used to give the look and feel, give look and feel of the web pages. So it is used to give look and feel for the web pages, but that's not the case with the XML. Okay, with XML that's not the case. HTML is used to give look and feel for the web pages, whereas XML is used to store and describe the data. Okay, it can be used as a media whenever we have inter-language or inter-technology communication required. So we will talk more about XML. So let's first try to understand basic features. So I have been saying that XML is used to store the data, whereas HTML is used to give the look and feel of the web pages. So now how can we prove that how XML can be used to store the data, or how can we say that XML is basically uh, we can say is user defined, is having user defined text, or how XML file looks like. So for that, what I will do is I'll take an example. So let me put a question for you guys. Ideally, when we work in any application, or whatever applications you might have designed at your college level or at your post graduation level, I just want to understand which media have you used to store the data. What have you been using to store the data?
Like local disk.
No, yeah, that's true. See, ultimately everything is stored in a disk. That's true. But like files, tables, like this, what do you more extensively use to store the data? Let's say you
Files.
files, or ideally we use, more secured one or more reliable one. The considered is Oracle database or some, maybe it's not only Oracle database, maybe MySQL. So there are different databases which we ideally use. Let's say when you develop your mini project or the main project, okay, when you might have done the BTech, so you would have this Oracle database or MySQL where you store the info. Is it right? Now I'm saying XML can be also used to store the data. So now what we'll do is we'll take a table where we have got some info, and same info we'll try to replicate in XML file. In the process, we will develop the analogy between the Oracle database, how it stores the data and how XML stores the data. And also we will understand how to get started with XML basically. So let's assume there is a table class within which I have three columns: student ID, student name, and student phone number. Student ID, student name, and student phone number. And let's say we have student ID as 101, student name is Sumit, and student phone number is 90001262273. On a very similar note, let's say student ID is 102, name is Amit, and the student phone number is 90001262274. Okay, this is what we have. Now this is the info which is in one of the database objects, that is a table. Now the same info has to be stored in XML file, because I told how a database can be used to store the data. On a very similar note, even XML can store the data. So we'll try to replicate the same info in the XML file, but before we do that, let's try to understand that what are the different rules which are required to be kept in mind when we start with the XML. Because each and every language we work with, each and every language has got some grammatical rules. Yes, each and every language has got some grammatical rules. That is nothing but syntax. So syntax is called as the grammar of the language, and each one of us has to make sure that when we work in any particular language, we abide by the syntax, okay, offered by that language. Otherwise, our code might not get interpreted as it should have been. So what we will try to do is, first we'll try to understand certain rules, and then we'll try to replicate this info in the XML file. So my rule number one says XML doc must have root elements. Must have a root element, not root elements. It must have a root element. What does that mean is, let's say you write 10 elements, 15 elements, 100 elements, but those all should ultimately have a parent element. See, let's say I have student ID, student name, student phone number. These look like the elements at the same level in the hierarchy, but these all should reside within a root element on the top of all these elements. So there must be a root element or a parent element which has to be always declared or defined in XML file. We cannot have an XML file which does not have a root element. Point number one. Now each starting element must have a closing element. Okay, so what does that mean? So if I start any element, I must close that element also. So if you work in the HTML file, if sometimes we even don't close the elements, it works absolutely fine. But that's not the case with the XML. In the XML, it is mandatory to close each and every element which has been started. Third point is, all the elements are case sensitive. So you have to make sure you're using the same case while starting or while opening the element or closing the element. You cannot afford to use the different cases at two different times. Then if you do that, those would be considered as two different elements. Okay, so case sensitive means when the uppercase character is not equivalent to the lowercase characters, then we consider it to be case sensitive. And the fourth point, which I've already told, is XML doc is composed of elements. So we define n number of elements within the XML doc. So these are the four rules which we have to take care of while designing our XML file. And now what we will do is, whatever info we have over here, the same info we'll try to replicate within an XML file. So whenever we write an XML file, okay, let's say my XML file name is class. So it will be something like class.xml. .xml is the extension of a pure XML file. Okay, so .xml is the extension. This is one more thing. Now once we have .xml over here, now let's get started following following the this info. Let's say the same info whatever is there over here, the same has to be replicated, but at the same time we have to make sure that we abide by all these rules. So first of all, let's identify the root element. Now as per your knowledge, as per your observation, when you observe this table and you have to replicate the same info within an XML file, what do you think should be the root element? What do you guys think, that which element should be the root element while I try to replicate the same info in a form of XML file?
I think all these three attributes, which are student ID, student name, and student phone number.
See, that those would be definitely there. See, but parent means only one. Okay, so these are like child elements, or these are like sibling elements, which are at the same level in the hierarchy. But these all should reside within some element, which is called as a root or parent element. So first of all, let's identify what should be the root element or parent element, inside which these all elements can be enclosed.
Class.
Okay, great. So class will be the root element. That's true. So I told each starting element must have a closing element. So I started the element and at the same time I closed it so that I don't forget it later on. Now what should be there within the class? Okay, class
Student
is the
detail.
okay, so very good. So we should not have directly student ID, student name, student phone number, because what you observe over here is that these are the details corresponding to two students, and within class we can have n number of students. So the next element you should have is either student detail, something like that, or let's say we can have student also, but there should be one element which is specific to each student. Okay, within one element I cannot have the info of all the students. So within the class again I need one more element where I have each student info. So how many student elements should be there for this use case? Let's say within class I have student element. So how many student elements must be there?
Three.
Two student elements must be there.
Okay,
Why?
I mean the number of students are 2, but the details are 3 rows, 3 columns, right? So what
Right.
about it?
Yeah, that's true. There are three details. That's true. But within student we will have those details. Student ID.
Okay, okay.
Are you understanding? See, those details corresponding to each student. So that's why what I'm saying is within class I have got student, and corresponding to the first student I have this info. Corresponding to the second student I have this info. If I don't do that way, and if I try to put all the students info within the same student, within the same class element, then it becomes difficult to segregate the info at later on time. Okay, because see, we are storing this info, that's fine, but later on we would need to fetch this info from the XML file. But when we store the details in the database, so do we store it and our job is done, or at later stage we also try to fetch those details from the database?
Yeah, obviously we will retrieve. We need to
Right.
retrieve.
And we have to put the information in such a fashion so that when we try to retrieve it, it can be done effectively in a lesser time and with lesser effort. So that's why in order to segregate my info in a proper fashion, I'm trying to have two students element within a class element, and each student element will have student ID.
So name
Yes,
and phone number.
absolutely correct. Student name.
So what do we call these? Are the can we call these as attributes, or
No,
do they have any specific name?
these all are called as elements.
Elements. Okay.
Okay. There is something called as attributes as well. We'll talk about this, but so far whatever we have talked is only XML elements.
Okay.
Kishore, are you in sync with me? Are you following me? Any doubts so far? Okay, this is my class within which I have got a student element, and within the student element I have got student ID, name and the phone number, and I copy the same thing for the next element as well, but I'll change the data. Yes, so you see we are storing the same info whatever was there in the database, Oracle database table. The same info I have stored in the XML file, And here, just to indicate it is an XML file, we'll write the first line XML version, okay, which is standardized to 1.0 and the corresponding encoding format.
Like if we have a n number of students, so we need to write a number of student ID name same way.
Yes, absolutely correct. So if you have, let's say, 10 students, then you will have 10 student elements. Within each student element, you will have the corresponding student info. So this corresponds as
Okay.
one record in the table.
So it's just like filling an Excel sheet, like a database sheet, right?
Yeah, you can say, see this, even Excel, XML, database, these all are used to store the data. Even in Excel, what do you do? In Excel also you store the data ultimately, right? So these are the
Yeah.
different ways to store the data. But the beauty of the XML is that it is completely platform neutral, which makes it more acceptable when we work with the middleware technologies. Because middleware has to be in some format which is neutral. It should not be supporting Java, it should not be supporting .NET, it should not be supporting Smart it should not be supporting C++. So it has to be in some neutral format. It has to be in some neutral format. That's why we prefer middleware being designed in the XML.
Okay.
Okay, now this is one thing. Now like this, you can have n number of student elements. See, one more thing is, now whatever student elements we have, these all have the same context. When I say the same context, means each student element will have student ID, student name, student phone number. But let's assume we encounter a scenario. Let's assume we encounter a scenario where we have two student elements, but those have a different context. When I say different context, see, let's say one student element is holding student ID, name and the phone number, and the other student element is holding student address, student father's name, student mother's name. Then such two elements within the same XML file might create ambiguity to the parser, that how can you have two elements with the same name but a different context. It's something like having two people in a project with the same name, with the same face, with everything same. So at least we should have some mechanism so that we can, try to differentiate between the two. Are you understanding? So the point I'm trying to say is, I have two or more student elements with the same context. There is no issue at all. So right now I have two student elements with the same context only. So there is no problem with this code, whatever I've written so far. But you might encounter certain scenarios when you work in the real time, that you have two student elements. Okay, both have the same name, but within that, whatever elements you have are different. Are you understanding? So whenever you encounter such scenario, this creates ambiguity to the XML parser. There will be XML parser which tries to interpret your code. So this creates ambiguity to the XML parser, and whenever we have such kind of problems, it's required that we use, some concept called as namespaces. We use some concept
Actually,
called,
why will I have a question, like why will it create any ambiguity? Because here we are clearly declaring all these elements, right? So if you have different elements, so obviously we will be declaring them in this class. So why will it create any ambiguity?
I'll tell you. Why will it create ambiguity? I'll tell you. So for example, you have got the same info in the database. Okay, let's say
Yes.
you have the same info in the database. Let's talk here. Now you want to fetch the name of the student whose ID is 1 or 2. Then how do you find it? Let's talk about the
Uh,
database first.
yeah. When you simply punch in the student ID, then it should be able to retrieve the details which are saved in that particular class.
No, that's fine.
Whatever, if you,
No, my question is
yeah.
something different. I'm saying, let's say these details are stored in the database. Okay. In
Okay.
normal database, you have got a table class within which you have all this info. Now I'm asking you to find the name of the student whose ID is 1 or 2. Then how do you find it?
I'll just write a query for this.
Absolutely
I
correct.
mean, I mean,
You will write us some
what?
SQL
Sorry.
query. You will write some SQL
Yeah.
query, right? So you will write something like, select
Yeah.
student name from student where
ID
student ID
or
is equal to 1 or 2. Yes,
yes.
that's what you're
Yes.
gonna write.
Yeah.
Now, this SQL query is a mechanism to fetch the data from the database. right? Whenever we have to retrieve the data from the database, we write SQL query. On a very similar note, when we have to retrieve the info from an XML file, because XML is also used to store the data, so there has to be
Okay.
some mechanism which uses to fetch the data from the XML file. Definitely we cannot use SQL queries for that. So we have got a different mechanism which is used to fetch the data from an XML file, and the different mechanism is XPath. Okay, what is
Okay.
XPath? XPath is an XML based language. It is an XML
Which
based
is used
language,
to test
yes, which is used to fetch the data,
retrieve the data.
fetch or retrieve the data from XML files, or using this we can navigate within the XML file.
Okay.
Okay, now let's say the same requirement, okay, the same requirement which we have achieved using the SQL query, I have to do that using this XPath, right? So both are the languages used for the same purpose, though their formats are different, everything is different, but both are used for the same purpose. That's both are used for same purpose. So let's try to understand the first of all the format, how the XPath is used. XPath always starts with a root node. Okay, this format slash represents the root node. So according to you, in this XML, which is the root element over here?
Class is the root element.
Right, class is the root element. Now let's assume, instead of having the ID, now should have some mechanism to differentiate these these student elements. Yes, I should
Yes.
have some mechanism to differentiate these student elements. So whatever I wrote is correct, but in order to basically differentiate between the two elements more uniquely or more easily, it's better to use some ID. So let's say I use the ID as 101,
Hmm?
ID as 101. See,
Okay.
so this basic, because I should have some mechanism, right, to differentiate between the two student elements. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. So I have a question now. So if we have some any element extra in the student ID, I mean in the section of the student ID 1 or 2. For example, if you have the student address, so when we fetch the data using this student ID, we will be able to retrieve the address too, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Whereas in 101 we will not get the student address.
Yes. See, when you say about the structure has to be same. If let's say for the student one we do not have the address, then definitely the
Yeah.
correct format will be, the correct format will be you have the student address element.
Empty.
Absolutely correct. This is how you define an empty element. Okay, this is the correct format, that you should not have a scenario where that element itself does not exist. But though if such kind of things happen, that is also possible. Like it's possible to achieve a scenario where we do not have a student address element itself, but that is not the standard format. The standard says that you should have that as an element, but that can be an empty element.
Okay.
Okay, now that is
Yeah.
one thing. Just give me a moment. Okay, I'm getting a call.
Okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so whatever you are saying absolutely so far is correct. Now what I'm trying to say is, see, it is not, I'm not saying that we cannot have student ID as the element. So this is called as an attribute and this is called as an element. Sometimes what happens is we can use it either as an attribute, either as an element. Nobody stops it. Nobody stops us. Nobody defines that this should be used as an attribute, this should be used as an element. But we have to understand the use case and we have to take a go that whether designing or defining this particular thing as an attribute helps me more, or defining this particular thing as an element helps me more. See, you should go for only attributes only in the scenario when this gives you an add-on. Otherwise, the use of attributes is not recommended when we work in this XML. Use of attributes is not recommended until and unless you find some special help, until and unless you find some add-on. So it adds some value to your solution, then only you should go for attributes, or else you should not go for attributes. In this scenario, I am feeling it will add a value. The value is that it will help me to differentiate between the different student elements. But let's say I do not take attribute, then also I can differentiate between the two different student elements, but that would be a lengthier approach. But since we are in initial stages all only, so I don't want to confuse you guys, I just want to go with a simpler approach. I am designing ID as an attribute. Are you understanding? So there is no restriction that if we take as an attribute, that is the only way we can do it. There is nothing like that. Are you understanding?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Now same query, whatever I used in our SQL, I want to achieve the same thing in the XPath. So what I am taking is I am taking var name is equal to. So here name is a variable which will hold the data that is fetched by your XPath expression. Okay, instead of SQL query, what terminology we use? We use XPath expression is used to fetch the data from the XML file. Okay, whatever data it fetches, that has to be stored somewhere, right? And let's say I'm storing in a variable and that variable name is name. Are you understanding so far? So now what is the root element? Class is the root element. So I'm saying within the XML file I should go to the root element and then I should go to the student element. Now which student element I have to go? I have to go to the student element whose ID is what?
102,
102.
102,
So,
whatever.
okay, whatever, let's say 102. So whenever we have an attribute, it becomes easier to find because I have defined one attribute at the element level itself, which helps me in differentiating among the different student elements. So whenever we have to define attribute, we have to use this brackets, and here at the rate symbol is used. At the rate indicates attribute. Which attribute? ID is equal to 102. Okay, ID is equal to 102, and within this I should go for student name. Now this expression will fetch me the name of the student, which is defined within the class root element and which is defined within the student element whose ID is 102. Yes.
What if, what if we don't give the student name? Doesn't it give all the details?
Yes, if you write, like let's say if you give this much, okay, it will fetch the complete node. Complete node means
I'm
student
sorry.
ID, student name, and the phone number, everything.
I'm sorry for asking too many questions. I'm completely out of computer
No,
science
no.
student, so
See, there is nothing wrong. You should definitely ask. Then only it becomes more interactive. That's how I like. There is nothing wrong in asking. Okay, definitely you must ask this. Okay, so if you use this much, then it will fetch the complete node. When I say complete node means this complete thing. It's something like using star, select star from student. It's something like that. But when you want to make it more specific, then you have to use student name.
okay.
And any doubts so far? Any doubts?
No, I don't
No.
have any.
Okay, so now here using attribute helped me to easily identify the element. If let's say this ID was not there, if this ID was not there, then also we could work around. It's not the case that if we do not have attribute, we cannot find it, but it would have been little lengthier. What would have been lengthier? So first we have to run a loop. Within the loop, I have to check every student's ID, and if the ID is 102, then I will fetch the name. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say? If let's say the same solution had to be given, provided that there is no attribute, then what we'll do, we'll run a loop, we'll run a for loop in which I will traverse each element and I would check the ID of each element. I mean, I would check the value of student ID element. If it equals to 102, if it equals to 102, then we are going to fetch, what we are going to fetch? Student name. Is it clear? But this would have been lengthier approach. That's why I tried to show you with the attribute. Now the point is, now the basic question which I think Rutvik asked me is that how does it create a problem when we have one more student element, with some different data? Yes. So let's say here we had ID as 102. I retrieve it back. Here I have got an ID. let's say 103. Okay, but let's say we have student father's name. Okay, please just don't observe the spelling mistake. These are typos. I definitely know the spellings. Okay, so student father's name is something like Shri Venkat Reddy. Okay, which is just an assumption. Okay, I write student over here. Okay, now let's say let's assume that we do not have IDs. Okay, one scenario is we have the IDs, but let's say we do not have IDs. Now I try to check ID in each. I want the, let's say, some info based on the ID. So will I have the ID element in the third tag I have here within this third student element? Do I have any ID element?
Oh,
I don't have any ID element. So what happens is when it tries to run a loop and it tries to check the ID value for each student element, and when it comes to this student element, it will find that there is no such element itself. Okay, there is no such element itself. And even let's say if you try to find out student father name, okay, from this XML for the student whose ID is 102, will you get anything? Student father's name for the student whose ID is 102. Will you fetch
no, no,
anything? No. So in
no.
that case, it creates an ambiguity. So at some places you have father name as an element, in some places you have an ID and the number. So the standard says that you should have the same elements designed within the multiple student elements. You may not have the value for few, but you should have same elements designed. You cannot change the context completely. So for example, if I have to give you one more better example, let's say I have a table element. Okay, let's say we both are working on a project and we are both are writing our XML files which are required to be merged later on. So I was writing table as something like name, dining table. Okay, please observe it carefully. Width, let's say 120, width and table. So this is my XML piece of code. Now here there was Rutvik also there. He was also writing some table related code. Table. Here it was, let's say he wrote table as, let's say, something like place to be placed. I said living room. Okay, I'm just trying to explain you with an example. So now let's say this was Rutvik's piece of code, and now somehow we have to merge this code. Earlier there was a boundary because these were two separate files. Now I have to merge this code. Now let's say when I merge this code, when it goes to the XML parser and when I try to say table element, so it gets an ambiguity. Are you talking about the table element which has got name and width within itself, or are you talking about the table element which has got place to be placed element? So in order to avoid some ambiguity, we have got a mechanism. But first you have to understand these kind of definitions definitely create ambiguity for the XML parser. If you know Java, are you people aware about the Java? Little bit?
No,
No, that's great.
no.
No, then let's not talk about the Java if you're not aware about that. It's something like, let's say there are two people with the same name working in the project. Let's say in my batch itself, I have got two Ritviks. So I should have some mechanism to differentiate, right? Because if I say Ritvik, then I'm not specifying which Ritvik I'm talking about. Similarly, when I say table, I don't know which table I'm talking about. I'm saying name of the table. In one of the elements I have got name of the table, but in other one I don't have it. So this definitely creates ambiguity for the parser. This kind of ambiguities can be avoided with a concept called as namespace. Namespace is used to avoid the ambiguity.
So this is exclusively for XML, right?
Absolutely correct. Namespace is used to avoid the ambiguity whenever we have two elements with the same name. Same name but different context. Okay, see, this concept is there in each and every language, but that might not be called as namespace. It might be referred with a different name. I can explain you also how does it mean, what does it mean. So do you know what is schema in the database? Any idea? What do you mean by schema? in the database? Yes or no, guys?
Like it contains a kind of tables depending on the schema.
Absolutely correct. Schema is like a partition. Okay, each schema will have its own database objects. Okay, there are 5 schemas. Each schema will have its own database object. Let's say there are 2 tables, okay, with the name student, okay, which are required to be created, and each table has got different number of columns. Please understand the use case. I am saying we need to design 2 tables with the name student, and both the tables have got different number of columns or different names of the columns. So can you do it within the same schema?
I assume no.
No, because
Yes.
within the same schema, can you create 2 tables with the same name?
No, I mean there will be no differentiation if you do the same, right? The
Because,
machine couldn't.
see, the moment you create a table, so I'll explain you what I'm saying. So right now, let's say I am into some schema. Let's say my schema is system. Okay, my schema system, it is taking some time to log in. Okay, here it is. So now let's say there is a table already defined in this particular schema, and the table name is student. I tried to log in into this, and I see there are two columns, student ID and student name. Now I want one more student table which has got columns, student phone number and student address. Is it possible to create one more table within the system schema which has got different columns? Yes,
No, no, because it will not understand which table we are referring to.
absolutely correct. Similarly, let's say I have one more schema. Okay, I have got one more schema, AQ underscore user, AQ underscore user. So these are the different schemas I have defined in my database. So here, let's say, do I have any student table? There is no student table. So can I create a student table over here which has got different columns? Can I do that?
Yeah.
So yes, I can do
Yes.
that. So this schema is helping me to have two database objects with the same name but different context. Yes, otherwise I could not do that. On a very similar note, the concept of namespace in XML allows you to have two XML elements with the same name but different context. Ideally we cannot have it. Just now you people only told, right, within the system schema I cannot have two database objects with the same name but different context. That's not possible. Similarly in XML also it is not possible, but if at all you have to make that possible in the database, what do? You use the concept of schema. Similarly, when you have to that make possible in the XML, you have to use the concept of namespace. What exactly is namespace? I have not talked it. I have not talked about it, but there is something called as namespace which helps in avoiding the ambiguity whenever you have two elements with the same name but different contexts. Do you understand this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any doubts so far?
So this
No.
is only one functionality of many in namespace, right?
Come again.
I said this is one of the functionality of namespace, right?
Absolutely
It has
correct.
other.
Yes, it has got different usages, but this is the basic funda why namespace was introduced. Namespace has got other uses as well. We'll talk about this, but at this point of time, I just want you to understand the basic stuff. We'll talk more about namespace. Okay, maybe we'll take 2 to 3 sessions to talk only about namespace. That much is the significance of the namespace. But
Okay.
at least, do you understand what is the basic use of namespace? Why are we using it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, how do we use it? I haven't talked, but you understand why we need it. And do you understand why do we need XPath?
Yeah.
Okay, what is the use of XPath?
To retrieve to call the
Data?
class, right?
No,
Yeah.
to retrieve the data from XML file,
Yeah, from the XML file.
right? To retrieve the data from the XML file, we are using XPath, so that's understandable. Now, when we were writing about this XML file, so this is called as a root element. Can we have an XML file which does not have a root element?
No.
No, that is must. If you do not have root element, that will not be considered to be a valid code. Now what happens is this is called as root element or parent element. Okay. and this is called as a child element, and these student ID, name and the phone number are called as sub-child elements. And any element which is at the same level in the hierarchy are called as siblings. Okay, any number of elements which are at the same level in the hierarchy are also called as siblings. In this example, can we call student ID, student name and the student phone number as siblings?
No, actually,
If you try
we
to,
can call,
we can call or we cannot call.
we cannot, I guess.
I think we can call, because if you try to give the hierarchy, the highest hierarchy is class, then student. Now within the student, do you find student ID, name, phone number? These all are same type of elements, right? These are like columns.
Okay, okay, yeah.
Are you understanding? These are lying at the same level in the hierarchy. When I say at the same level in the hierarchy, it means principal is at one hierarchy, then then teacher is one hierarchy, then student is one hierarchy. So all the students can be called as siblings, all the teachers can be called as siblings, so we do not have n number of principals. But if that is the case, let's say we have multiple branches of a school, then all the principals can also be called as siblings. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is not so important, but the more important thing which you have to understand is that we told you that XML file just consists of elements, right? XML file consists of elements. Now elements are of three types. This is very, very important. Elements are of three types. First is simple element. Next is complex elements. And the third is mixed elements. Okay, right now, as of now, we'll focus on simple and complex only. Those elements which actually hold the data and are based on some primitive data types are
So
called
this is
as,
for both of them, right? This is a common explanation for both of it.
yeah, I'll explain this, and again I'll switch back to the XML file and I'll explain. Okay, I'm saying now any element which holds the data and it is based on some primitive data type is called a simple element, and those elements which do not hold the data directly, rather it contains the element within itself, rather it contains the element within itself. Okay, now this is the definition of simple and complex. I will switch back to my XML file which I had created some time back. Now this is my XML file. I am saying any element which holds the data within itself. Any element which holds the data within itself is a simple element, and any element which further contains elements within itself is a complex element. We'll start with a class element. Now you tell me, as per the definition, what do you feel? Class is a simple element or a complex element?
Simple element.
So does class element hold the data, or does it hold elements within itself?
It will hold the data.
No. Class holds
It will hold elements.
Class is holding the
Okay,
elements,
okay.
right? Student, see, what is class holding? Class is holding student, and student is the element or student is the data,
Element.
Element.
Yeah.
right? So class is a complex element. What about student?
It's a simple element. It's holding data.
It will hold the data.
No, it is also a complex element, because student ID is the element which is holding the data. See, 101 is there. This is my data. This 101 is there with which element? Student ID. It is not there with
Yeah.
student. Student again contains the element student ID and name and the phone number, but the student itself does not hold the data. It is student ID which holds the data. It is student name which holds the data. It is student phone number which holds the data. So here in this example, class is a complex element, student is a complex element, but your student ID is a simple element. Your student name is a simple element.
So can we call all the siblings are simple elements?
No, we cannot say that, because you might have student also, like this student. This
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
student is also sibling to this student, but these are not simple elements. These are again complex elements.
Complex. Yeah, I got you.
Okay, now are you guys following me? What is complex? What is simple? Any element which holds a
Yeah,
data
yeah,
within itself is, is a complex, which is a simple element. Any element which holds the elements further in itself is a complex element. Now, do you understand? See, the empty element is written like this. Okay, this was a my. This is how we write an empty element.
Yeah.
This empty element. So you understand now how to write comments in XML. Do you know what are comments? See, comments are some
yeah,
non-executable statements which make the program or which make the file more understandable and readable.
Just to for a reference, right?
Yes, let's say you write some code and you leave that company and now some other developer comes in and replaces you and he wants to understand your code. So instead of going line by line, if you write some comments, that would make him to understand that what functionality you have tried to cater within the subsequent piece of code. Right, so these are the
Okay.
non-executable statements. It's something like when you have a lot of notebooks in your bag, you keep a name chip, right? Just to signify that this book which belongs to which particular subject.
Yeah.
These are the non-executable statements which make the program or file more understandable and readable. Okay, now how do we write comments? In XML, we write comments like this. So after this, whatever comments you have to write, this goes over here and then you have to close it like this. So whatever you write within this angular brackets written in this format, those things are considered to be comments, and these are not considered by the XML parser when it tries to parse the file.
Okay.
Okay, any doubts so far, like how to write a XML file? What is the difference between simple and a complex element? What is the use of namespace? Like why actually the namespace is required? Because it helps in avoiding the ambiguity whenever we have two elements with the same name but different context. And next thing is like what is XPath? On a higher level, can you understand? I think you can understand now why do we need XPath. And we can have attributes as well as elements. There is no basically compulsion, or there is no basic rule which tells whether we should have elements or elements, or whether we should have elements or attributes, but it depends on the use case we are working with. So having attribute helps us more or having element helps us more. So we can have either of these. Any doubts so far?
like if we have a huge data, so it's too difficult to write a huge number of elements, right?
Yes. No, see,
So
basically when you have huge number of records, so do you need to insert those records into the database?
no.
No, let's say there is a table which will hold the data about all the citizens of the country. Then will we have
Okay.
then we will have multiple records or not over there,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah.
So similarly, we will also have multiple elements also in the XML file. Okay, let's say we have 1,000 records in the database table, then we will have 1,000 elements in the XML file.
Okay.
I mean, what was your question? Can you come again?
No, no, no. Like, so if you want to write like you write the student ID, student name, the elements. So if we have a huge data, like suppose a number of student IDs, name, phone number. So we need to write each element separately, right?
Right, that's true. You are saying something like
So
let's
it
say
takes,
you are saying something, we have
yeah,
student ID, name and the phone number right now, but we may have student address also, we may have student father's name, we may have student mother's name, we may have student base location, something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, then you will have to have multiple elements within the student parent element. Yes,
Oh, okay.
I mean that's something
So
unavoidable.
my question is so then it will be like complex, right? So it's better. Why we use XML then? It's too complicated thing. So
It's
why
a
we
risk.
need to use XML?
See, how is it complicated? You know, when you are telling that you have to store, let's say, 100 things about a student, when you store it in the database, don't you define the 100 columns over there?
Yeah.
Does that come automatically? No. When you create the when you create the database table, even there you create 100 columns, same thing you are doing over here, then how it is different from that?
Okay.
I mean, when you are creating the table, again you have to write the name of those columns or not. That table.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
So the same thing you are doing over here as well. And to answer your question, that if same thing can be done in the Oracle, why we can't do? Why the hell we are using this XML? The reason is XML is platform neutral, which is not the case with the databases. Those are not platform neutral.
Oh, okay.
Are you understanding?
Yeah, yeah, I got it.
Any doubts so far in today's session? Like we will discuss one more thing and we'll wind up today's session. But any doubts so far? Anything which you're not
No.
understanding?
I mean, I don't know if it's a doubt or so, but I just wanted to know, can a graphical file be an XML file?
See, anything which would need the data, let's say you need HTML, okay, in when you design a web page or when you design any graphical page or anything, when you design any graphics also, if you need some data which is required to be populated over there, then to store that data we can use XML file. So let's
So
say
we can
you,
also handle the graphical files using XML, right?
what do you mean by when you say what is there actually in the graphical file? I don't have an idea. What is there in a graphical file ideally?
Like we have something like objects, 3D objects or objects.
Yes, we can use, like, there are a lot of out of the box utilities which convert, let's say you have a Java code, that same Java code can be converted into XML file. Okay, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
That, okay, those objects can be considered, can be converted into XML objects. We can do that.
Okay. In the
So
same format, or does it have a different format?
I mean, that will again, it will represent the same format, but the conventions will be of the XML. The
Okay.
syntax will be of the XML, but it will represent the same object. It will not try to alter anything. It will try to say represent the same thing in the XML format. That's it.
Okay.
Okay. Now coming to the last thing I wanted to talk is there is something called as entity references. Okay. There is something called as entity references. What does it mean is, so if do you guys at least know C language?
No.
No. Oh my God. So you have done your masters in which in which stream you have done your masters?
I've done in avionics, which is not at all related to the software.
Okay. No
I'm
issues.
aviation.
Okay, no issues. We'll take your help when we have to learn that. But right now let me try to explain you. So what happens is,
But I
there
have a
are,
basic idea about C and Java.
okay, then it's fine. If you have basic idea, it's more than enough because I'm not going to get into the programming. So each programming language which we have to basically write the programs or to design the solutions will have some inbuilt constructs. Inbuilt constructs means some keywords which actually specifically do some specific task. For example, we have if statement to check certain condition, for loop to run some looping statements, while, do while, return statement, switch. So these are some specifically predefined things which has got some predefined meaning for the compiler. Do you agree with
Yeah.
me? On a very similar note, XML has got some special characters which has got fixed meaning to the XML parser. There are some special characters which has got special meaning to the XML parser. So those special characters are required to be not to use as a part of your data. For example, let's say there is a tag company name. Okay, there is a tag company name. Actually, in the when we define the elements, there should not be any space. Okay, by mistake I have given that. So let's say I write over here company name. Now company name is AT&T. Company name is AT&T. So how do we write this? AT and T. Yes. Now for
So
XML,
we
this,
need to give a space.
no, it's up to you whether you want to give it or not. That's up to you. I was talking about this space. By mistake, I had given the space over here. I was saying when you define the element name, you should not be giving the namespace. Oh, sorry, you should not be giving the space. Here, it's up to you whether in the data you want to give space or not. That's up to you. Now, the point which I'm trying to say over here is, here you see ampersand symbol is there, right? This
Yeah.
Yeah.
ampersand symbol is a special character to the XML parser. It has got again fixed meaning for the XML parser, so you are not authorized to use it as a part of your data. But now since I have got a requirement to use it as a part of my data, so the workaround is you should be using it as like this. You
Inverted commas? No.
no inverted commas. I'm using this. Oh my god, this, and I will just highlight this part. This complete will represent internally the ampersand symbol. You cannot use the
Okay.
ampersand symbol as is, since it is a special character and it has got fixed meaning. So whenever you have a requirement to use ampersand, when you cannot avoid it, you use ampersand, but you cannot use it as is. You have to use it this format. On a very similar note,
So
yeah, please tell me.
no, it's for only ampersand or for any special character.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So let's say there is some message, okay, if which says if salary is greater than 200. Okay, now the message is if salaries, this is my message or this is my data. Now here I am using again one special character greater than. This should not be used as is, rather it has to be used as ampersand GT. Okay, ampersand GT for, see, for this.
But here it's not a part of data, right? It is actually performing some function, right?
No.
So why do we need to
No,
write
it
that?
is not performing any function. Whenever you have got anything enclosed within the, let's say, tags, that is nothing but data.
Okay, okay.
Don't think that if I'm
So
writing if
functions,
don't think that if I'm writing if over here, then it is checking certain condition. It's not happening that way. We are just,
okay,
this is just a data. This is like a string.
okay. So where do we actually write the functions in XML? Do we write the functions?
Yes, we write that in XPath.
Okay,
Okay, we write that in XPath if we have to write the functions.
okay,
Okay, now for greater than, the symbol is ampersand GT. For less than, the symbol is ampersand LT. Okay, for apostrophe, the symbol is ampersand APOS semicolon. Are you understanding? So I will be giving you the
yeah.
PPT.
As you said, they are predefined. So the
Yes,
machine or the engine which where we can write the XML code, does it have predefined in that? I mean, like,
yes. So there
can
is
we access?
see, actually there are different XML parsers. Okay, one very famous is SAX parser, SAX parser. Okay, so this is something like how in C or Java we have compiler. Similar, we have XML parsers to interpret the code of XML.
Okay.
Okay, so where these have been predefined. So let's say if I ask you, if do you agree with me if or switch or for or while these are predefined for the compiler?
Yes.
Yes. How can you check it?
As soon as as far as I know, if you type IF, then there will be a pop-up where you can actually
Okay, so
select it.
you are saying you will get some, that is, see, that is being taken care by your IDE. IDE means integrated development environment such as Eclipse or wherever you are writing the data.
Yeah.
Those have been
Yeah.
designed in such a fashion that whenever you use any keyword, you have a color change or you have got some pop-up or something.
Yeah.
But you are not going into the compiler and checking, right? Similarly, here also we have got some IDEs which helps us in identifying whenever we use some predefined characters or some special characters. So whenever you
Yeah.
use these characters, ideally you have to take care that you are not using is as is, rather you are using the workaround notation for representing the same character.
Okay.
Is it fine?
Yeah. So
Any,
far, so
doubt,
good.
any doubts from anyone? What about you, Kishore? Any doubts?
Yeah, but like we're gonna use XML a lot in this SOA.
Yeah. So are you finding this XML quite difficult?